Welcome to the God-Centered Living Experience. I'm Dick Hanson, your host for this series, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you our topic today. Last time we talked about the tithe, and this time we're going to focus on giving in general, but more specifically what is often referred to simply as the offering. We're going to talk about motivation, purpose, the principles of giving. These will be our subject matter for today, all intended to enhance your God-centered living experience. An interesting statement in Malachi 3, 8-12 we read last time simply asks the question, will a man rob God? And God responds by saying, yet you rob me, but you ask, how do we rob you? And the response was, in tithes and offerings. Often people kind of lump everything together under the word tithe. But clearly in the scripture there's a difference between the tithe and the offering. In the Old Testament, and we talked about this last time, they tithed their flocks. Remember we talked about how they would put out a rod and they would run their sheep under the rod, and every 10th one belonged to the Lord. In Leviticus 27, 32-33, it says, and concerning the tithe of the herd or the flock, of whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. He shall not inquire whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. And if he exchange it at all, then both it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. And so very clear instruction in Leviticus 27 about this process of proclaiming every 10th one in the flock belonging to the Lord. There's a difference, though, between the tithe and the offering. Remember, the 10th one, it didn't have to be perfect. It wasn't about quality. It was simply about obedience. The offering, however, must be perfect. The tithe, a test of obedience, it's 10%, no variation. Vegetables or whatever was produced, the 10th was given to the Lord. But the offering is a test of something else. What would it be? Well, I'm going to tell you the offering is a test of motive. Both indicate our loyalty to God, but the offering is a test of motive. Why are you giving? Why are you doing this? Now, we've talked about that God must be first in everything. The offering, like the tithe, must also be first. After that which belongs to God, the tithe is set apart, the freewill offering should be given. These become as sacred as the tithe. Wow. The tithe and now the offering seem like God's wanting to take an awful lot out of my pocketbook. Well, again, the question then would come, how much do I give? How much are offerings? Well, the offerings are different than the tithe. Tithing, in fact, is not really giving, but returning. Free will offerings are truly a giving experience. But let's go to the Bible for this journey. Giving, first of all, is godlike. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It talks about God so loved the world that he gave. Giving is godlike. The gift of Christ is the underlying motivation for all Christian activity. The question always comes, how do I thank him for what he's done for me? Well, let's get back to the offering. 1 Corinthians 16:2 says, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. It says on the first day of the week that an offering was to be set aside so that Paul, this is Paul speaking, would not have to take up an offering when he came. It would all be set aside, systematic, planned, and so on and so forth. And the first day of the week in those days was a work day. And so the principle that's being revealed here is that the offering must be set aside whenever you're paid. In those days, people got paid daily. In Deuteronomy 16:17, it says, every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord, your God that he has given you. So giving, when we talk about offerings, when we talk about giving offerings, we are to give as God has blessed. There's no set amount. It's not like the tithe where it's 10%. We're to give as God has blessed. Now that makes it hard, doesn't it? That makes it very hard. Now, I want to talk about giving according to our potential. Not all of us have the same potential for giving. You know that there are people around you that are very wealthy. There are other people that are not so wealthy. In Luke 12, Jesus said, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." The size of an offering is only as important as the potential of the giver. Now, I had a friend of mine one time that had made a trip to the South Seas, and I believe it was the island of Guadalcanal. He had some pictures, which he showed me. They were very interesting pictures of a village in Guadalcanal. Many of the people were Christians. He had a picture of their church and of where they lived. But the thing that really caught my eye was in the middle of that village was a little tiny hut. And he explained to me that that hut was the tithe hut. That these people would go out into their crops, and every 10th vegetable, and I think they were like a sweet potato of some kind, every 10th vegetable that they harvested they would take and put in the tithe hut. Those were then taken and sold, and the money was then given for the cause of Christ there in that South Sea Island. Quite different than we would see in our culture, where we literally have dollar bills and coins and so on and so forth. But here are a couple of quotes that kind of tie this together for us. "However large the income or the possession of any person, any family, or any institution, let all remember that they are only stewards, holding in trust the Lord's money. All profit, all pay, our time, our talents, our opportunities are to be accounted for to Him who gives them all to us." Goes on to say, God will encourage His faithful stewards who are ready to put all their energies and God-given endowments to the very best use. As all learn the lesson of faithfully rendering to God what is His due, He, through His providence, will enable some to bring princely offerings. He will enable others to make smaller offerings, and the small and the large gifts are acceptable to Him if given with an eye single to His glory. You see, some give larger offerings, some smaller. It's all about potential. It's all about your ability to give. What about the very poor? Some people who are poor look and say, I can't do anything. My little bit isn't going to be anything compared to this very wealthy man in our church. But that's not the point. In the book Desire of Ages, which is one of my favorite books, it says this, page 615. "Among the poor there are many who long to show their gratitude to God for His grace and truth. They greatly desire to share with their more prosperous brethren in sustaining His service. These souls should not be repulsed. Let them lay up their mites in the bank of heaven. If given from a heart filled with love for God, these seeming trifles become consecrated gifts, priceless offerings, which God smiles upon and blesses." You see, the test of the offering is that it must be perfect. The test of the offering is motive. My motive must be perfect, and it doesn't matter whether I have a little offering or a large offering. It's about my potential. The tithe and the offering do differ. One, a test of obedience, the other, a test of motive. Both designed to prove our loyalty and to acknowledge God as the creator, owner, and giver of all things. Tithe is a partnership agreement. Offerings, simply an expression of love and gratitude to God for what He's done for us. The tithe is 10%. Offerings are dependent upon what God has done for you. And so to give an offering, we must be deep in prayer and say, Lord, what would you have me to do? It's a great examination of ourselves and the reasons why we're giving. Very important. So to repeat, number one, the tithe and offerings are different. Tithing is returning what is God's. The offering is a free choice, often called free will offerings. The giver determines the amount. It is a test of motive. Well, remember I have said, number two, motive. In giving, motive is everything. That's really what God is concerned about, is our attitude. Why are we doing what we're doing? Many times, the offerings that are given are really not offerings at all. They would qualify as a contribution to a need, but not an offering. It depends on motive. In giving to God, we are supporting His work. And as far as I know, there is only one plan given by God to support His work. Number one, God blesses people with talent, time, and a job. And number two, those people work hard with honesty, excellence, and integrity. Number three, they receive money, income, for their work. Number four, they return tithe and give free will offerings as the first act in the distribution of the money received. The tithe supports the ministry. The offerings support churches, schools, mission programs. That's why it's important to give through the channels that have been established. Number five, God continues to bless, and the cycle continues. But what about motive? Well, many gifts, many times when people give, they could be made for selfish reasons. Maybe a tax deduction. I've often wondered how my giving would be changed if there was no tax deduction involved. Sometimes when I give, it's to call attention to the donor, to impress people, for a tax deduction, a memorial to someone, a brick in a walkway, a plaque on a wall. But in all of these elements, there is a tiny bit of selfishness involved. And so it's very important to guard our motives when we are giving, to make sure that it is truly a free will offering and not simply a contribution, a donation only. The only true motive in giving an offering to God is our love for Him. That's it, pure and simple. Anything else distorts the gift. I want you to really think about this, and I want you to pray for a proper motive in your giving. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:14, he says, "For Christ's love compels us." He understood that this is the driving force in all of our choices, all of our decisions, and the way, in fact, that we see life. If you were to go back to the Old Testament, David had called for an offering from the people in the rebuilding of the temple. He had first of all showed them what he was going to do personally. He talked about how much money had been set aside, and then he invited the people to come and give. And he was so overwhelmed with the generosity, with people responding. This is what he said in 1 Chronicles 29, beginning with verse 14. He says, "But who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to offer as generously as this? For all things come from you, and from your hand we have given you. For we are sojourners before you, and tenants." See, not owners, but sojourners and tenants. "As all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there is no hope. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided to build you a house for your holy name, it is from your hand, and all is yours." You see, David understood. It all came from God. Ultimately, it all comes from God. And he was simply responding to the generosity of his people and overwhelmed with what God had done among them. Well, having said all of this, I'm sure there are some of you who are thinking, it's just too much. I don't think I can give that much. I don't think I can do all of this giving. Well, I want to leave this thought with you. Very important. Listen to these words. Humanity is limited to following God's directions. God is unlimited in producing the results. God has no limits. And all you're doing in your giving and your obedience and your God-centered living experience is allowing God to produce miracles in your life. I invite you to test that to see how that works out for you. Our discussion questions today. Number one, think about the difference between tithes and offerings. Which one do you think is more important? And then explain why you would make your choice. Number two, express how the faith element is present in your giving. And number three, what can distort our motives in giving? Make these very practical, and I pray you'll have a blessing as you in your groups or individually consider these questions. I'm Dick Hanson. This is the God-Centered Living Experience. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.